Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Today, joined by a good friend of mine, Dave Chrysler. Uh, Dave is operational excellence leader, systems thinker, founder of the Crysler Club, and he really specializes in helping organizations design and execute systems that actually work. I'm a big systems guy, so I'm really excited, Dave, that you're joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Greg. I mean, I think we've known each other for now like at least what, 4 or 5 years, something
Yeah,
like that already, right? Time flies, but
yeah.
yeah, like excited to be here and hopefully can share some thoughts for the folks tuning in and like I had somebody ask me like why this business and why this thing and it's like it's the only thing I know how to do. Like I learned by doing and experimenting and ultimately coming up with kind of just a different lens to to start thinking about these things and again it's really through the practical expertise that anything meaningful is materialized. So
Well, yeah, the name of the show is Stop Buying Tools, Start Building Systems. And so, Dave, why don't you, before we start to unpack all of that, why don't you give everybody a little background about yourself and that hands-on expertise that you have and what has led you to build the Chrysler Club.
yeah, great question. For me, I grew up in a family-owned business. My parents owned two different manufacturing businesses growing up, and then spent my professional career working for a company that grew through acquisition. So I was very fortunate that I was a young guy, and people continued to see opportunities and provide those opportunities for me. And what that really meant was I kind of grew into being a transition person for them. I was kind of one of a few people that were asked to relocate, to kind of figure out on the ground floor what it meant to, grow that particular business. And in every scenario, we kind of had, different resource pool and a different set of challenges because we were starting in a different place and we had access to different resources in terms of, product line and people and equipment, all of that stuff. And then, kind of, hey, we know where we need to go, right? We need to grow, so I just got a lot of opportunities, as I like to say, to do that both like from the ground floor, hands on. As time went on with that business, I was also doing that from more of a mentorship perspective, where the that particular facility or acquisition already had a leadership team in place, and so it was kind of hey, can you help get them integrated from a company culture perspective, kind of help them from a systems perspective, like more specifically like to our ERP environment or our estimation system. So yeah, it was just through that lens that, as I say, I got a lot of opportunity to figure out what it meant to not just build systems and kind of impact culture and all of those things, right? All of the typical stuff that you see with it, but it's kind of like to really understand what are all of the kind of pitfalls that we fall into thinking we're solving real problems, and unpack what that looks like. So that's a bit of the backstory into what led me to this point.
So, you started out, you're working for your folks. You said they own two different businesses?
Yeah, yep. Two different print companies when I was growing up.
Okay. And then you moved on from there, started to work for another company. At what point did you kind of realize that, hey, I don't want to be a CEO? I even though you are the CEO of the Chrysler Club, but I I'm not sure. I'm finding this unique path here with systems. What is it about systems that really kind of drew you in and made you focus on it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny timing too because I was reflecting on this not too long ago, and I think the kind of the one connect for me, and I'll kind of tell you through this story arc for a couple of different examples. But I was a kid, right? I was fascinated by taking things apart and just understanding like what was underneath them. right? Like, and my dad used to like just get super irritated because I was amazing at taking things apart, not so amazing at putting them back together the way that they came apart. And what's funny about it to
Keep them
me,
away from the lawnmower.
right? Yeah, like, oh yeah, yeah, forget it. Like, all kinds of stuff too, right? Like stereo, right? Like I'm dating myself, but like, stereo, like all kinds of stuff. I would just tear stuff apart. And it's funny because I never really connected all of these dots, right? But like that's my childhood, right? Like I like to tear stuff apart. I like to see how things were working from the inside. And the first opportunity that I ever really got to like figure out some meaningful problem really was for my parents. When I graduated high school, my dad, one of the commercial print shops. This was like back in the day where smaller, traditional commercial printing businesses did not generally do a lot of direct mail type of work, right? It was that direct mail was really kind of reserved for larger direct mail organizations.
Sure.
And so we were kind of on this ground floor idea, and my dad basically said, like, I really want to get into this. I think this is going to be something. I don't have the time or bandwidth to devote to it. Like, are you interested in coming to work here and figuring this out? Right. So it was like, when I think about all the trajectory and all the things that were ever, I got an opportunity to do, it's like, those are some of the earliest dots to connect. It was like, I knew what the goal was, right? Grow direct mail.
Mhm.
I knew what the bounds were. Don't spend a lot of money, go fast. Right. And it's like beyond that, that was it. We had like one piece of inkjet equipment that, didn't work great. Back then we had like no software to do like mail merges and all the stuff that you know to be true today. Like none of
Right,
that existed.
right.
Right. And so it was very much like kind of cobbling together all these different pieces and parts and a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimenting and a lot of just continuous improvement, right, refining this process. And lo and behold, we were successful with that. And they ultimately sold that business, and when they sold that business, I went to work for the new owner. And the next challenge came, right? Hey, we do a lot of catalog work and we need to start to do our own fulfillment. We have a 3PL that we've, contracted with, but we have this warehouse space. We need you to stand up a boutique, 3PL for us. It's like, okay, I don't know what that is, but sure, I can, figure out how to inventory catalogs and take orders from, clients and
Mhm.
pick and pack and fulfill them in an efficient and effective manner. No problem. Got you covered. Right. And so, I share those couple of things because that was the start of it. And I just got a lot of different opportunities to do things like that, when I was a production manager. Got an opportunity to take an entire, business unit that was not successful at another location, relocated and figure out how to grow it. And they still operate that, business unit today out of the facility that I started it with. Right. And it wasn't just me, right? Like this is a collective effort of people, but I very much fell into this type of orchestrator role where I loved diving in to understand the mechanics, and I just kind of insatiable about taking the resources that exist and doing something more effective than what we're doing with them today.
Okay,
That's kind of like the underlying tone.
and I think, what you're alluding to with systems is, I think it's and this maybe is the whole point of this show today, is that it's almost kind of an intangible, it's something that is not easy to grasp and get your arms around from an organizational perspective. Much easier to go to the tools, much easier to go to the talent. But you're saying, hold on, before you do anything with tools or talent, let's talk about systems. So let's talk a little bit about that and why that knee jerk reaction is to go to the tools or the talent. Why don't we
Yeah.
start there?
Yeah. I think inevitably it's because, tools today, from an outside perspective, seemingly are easy to measure ROI, right? We buy this thing, we know whether or not it's working, right? Based on maybe adoption, based on maybe output. my whole kind of, theory on this is, well, we already have a system in place, right? We already have people, right? We already have a process, could be more effective, more efficient. And generally speaking, for most organizations that, are out of infancy stage, they have technology. They have some sort of tool. Now, the big issue that I often find in kind of this whole, thesis of like stop buying tools and start building systems is the fact that, like I'll use something kind of in your world, right? Marketing, right? Let's talk about CRMs. You can make an argument that HubSpot is, better than Salesforce, or, better positioned than Pipedrive or one of the other 10,000 CRMs that are out there. Now, with the advent of AI, somebody could stand one up vibe coding this weekend, right? Like, and build their own custom CRM. That's not the point, right? Like, we're kind of talking about it at that tool lens. And what the real problem ends up being is adoption, is output, right? Like, so my entire basis is, let's fix that stuff first. I'm not saying you don't ever need to buy new tools, that you shouldn't be experimenting to understand what the feature sets are of specific things, right? But if we take the system lens and break that down, for me, that means planning, people, process, and technology in that very specific order, right? If we look at everything we're doing through that lens, we start to focus on the outcome, right? And the output, instead of being ultra focused on, the people and the tool, right? So it's like, hey, we have HubSpot. You know what the problem is? We need Salesforce. That's why people aren't using HubSpot. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with it, right? It has everything to do with how HubSpot was configured, how HubSpot was implemented, right? And the friction that people feel executing the processes within that system. So replacing HubSpot, in my fictional example, of course, right? But replacing HubSpot with Salesforce, which people do constantly, right? They're solving the wrong problem. They're solving for symptoms, right? And we get so kind of hell bent on like living in this solving for symptoms, because again, you talk to, you talk to Salesforce, right? Of course, they're going to tell you that HubSpot will not work in your industry or for your size or with your process flows, right? Well, they're selling you software, right? Like,
Right.
so you might want to, like take a pause, right? So yeah, that's kind of the whole basis for this idea is just, look, we already have a system in place. Let's figure out where the real gaps exist, right? What the root causes of those gaps are. Let's start there. You're already paying for this. You already have a team. We just need to put a little bit more effort, right? So, this is my planning component. Put a little bit more effort into unpacking what the real problems are, and then we need to ultimately address whatever those gaps are. Generally, they start with process and it rolls out to implementation, which other people will call team, right? Like, it's not a people problem, it's a, process and ultimately system problem.
Okay, so let's go back to that order again because I think that's I'm
Yeah.
gonna want you to hit this again.
Yeah.
Planning, you said start with the planning,
Yep.
then it was process,
Planning, people, right?
people,
Yep,
and then
then
process.
process, right,
Take
then
me
technology.
and technology. So
Yeah,
we just talked a little bit about the technology. Take me through those top 3 again.
yeah. So I unpack the planning a little bit, right? So there's going to be basically two different lenses of that. If you don't have, right, like a fully developed system, right, maybe don't have a tool, or you're in the early stages of outgrowing, because that does happen as well, right? We can outgrow a tool, outgrow our current system. That's the planning stage, right? So you want to be mindful of, like, again, what are the real problems that we're solving for, right? And I always try to take that from, like, you'll hear this said a bunch of different ways, but it's like, through the lens of the customer, right? Like, how do they value the output, right? So like, if let's stick to like this CRM, kind of marketing example, right? We want to be thinking through, like, how many touch points does it take to go from kind of, inquiry, we can map it all the way to invoice, right? But we can stop at, customer service or client success, however you want to define it. So it's like, let's map all of that. Let's see how many touch points, inquiry to kind of order takes. Are we introducing friction with our system, right? So that's where the planning piece is really critical. A lot of people skip over it and jump right into process. We don't really even understand what processes specifically we should be looking at. So it gets very convoluted very quickly. That's why I include planning, right? So for me, that's planning. Why is people second? Because people are the ones doing the thing, right? So there's a ton of tribal knowledge and context to be gleaned, right? Now, it's kind of the same reason that I won't put 100% kind of weight on what customers or clients are saying, right? Like, and I always use the kind of Henry Ford quote, right? Like, well, if I would ask my customers, what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses, right? But there's this collective picture that we're working on building, and depending on how end to end we want to get with these systems that we're developing, right, that's where those kind of process bounds start to get defined. But that's the whole point. We take value from how the customer is talking about it to us, measuring it, right? We contextualize that with our team, the people closest, right, doing the work, seeing the results, seeing the friction points, asking them for what their own built around, or built-in workarounds end up being, right? So now that's why people are second. Process, now we've really got something, right? Like now we've got something pretty darn clear that we're starting to attack. We have a problem statement. Now we can start to understand what are the specific process flows that impact this problem, right? So now we start to work through our traditional, process improvement, continuous improvement. Again, a variety of ways to do that. Plan, check, do, act, or plan, do, check, act. Sorry, um, you know, um, plan, execute, review, revise, repeat. Right? Like none of that stuff matters to me. It's all about the opportunity to improve or reduce those friction points. Again, some people will say like we need to eliminate waste. Maybe, right? But I'm not all about eliminating waste because there could be something that is technically wasteful that the customer values. So we can't just straight up eliminate waste, right? And then technology is the thing, right? Technology tool, however you want to say, it's the thing that enables the other three, right? So
Right.
technology literally is just in place to enable our people and process, right? But we make it way more, wild than it is, right? Like technology is just a transaction aggregator, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah. Take me back a little bit because that's very conceptual, and I appreciate the walkthrough. Can you give me a little bit more of a maybe a tangible example of something from start to finish using that? And I think because I'm getting a little bit, I need to get my head around the planning versus the process. Um, Take me back to that, and maybe if you have an example, I hate to put you on the spot here, but have an example of something where you actually went through all those 4 steps.
yeah. I mean, we talk about this is an existing client, but they kind of came to me because they had a growing backlog and were really struggling to not just get through that backlog, right, but their entire order cycle time was longer than they would like, right? So in that scenario, what do? You don't throw technology at that, right? You could maybe, but what is that really going to get us? Probably not a lot of additional output, right? So what's the next best thing? We throw people at that, right? Like let's run overtime, let's hire more people, right? So going back through the lens of systems thinking, right? Like how do we solve for this problem? Well, the planning stage came to problem definition. So the
Okay.
real problem, right, wasn't necessarily how they scheduled work, wasn't necessarily how they manufactured this, work, but what it really was how they released this work, right? So work was piling up in specific parts of their touch point, right? And so it's very much, the batch and queue where those batches and queues were creating additional delays. Those additional delays increased not just cycle time, but overall backlog. So that's how it tied back to, their scheduling issue, right? So some people would look at that problem and start to say, we need a new scheduling tool, right? Like that's my problem. We're not scheduling efficiently, right? So we need to be able to build a new scheduling tool or implement one, or I'm going to build one in Excel and I'm going to output all this stuff from our ERP. It's like you already have a best in class tool, right? And the problem isn't really scheduling, right? That's a symptom. That's a symptom of the issue. The backlog, symptom, right? All these things, symptoms. So the planning stage allowed us to really unpack at a deep level what was happening. How do we provide value, right, to the customer, right? What touch points, and ultimately how do we move those specific, orders in this case through those, through that manufacturing process, right? So doing that then allowed us to talk to all of the people, right, to understand like what challenges were they seeing, what did they see that was either slowing them down or creating additional issues that maybe compounded or in some cases even eliminated, right? Like, so you've got again these kind of ebb and flow of traditional manufacturing process. This is where kind of things really changed, right? Because this was now our opportunity to start to address those processes. One of the key processes that we had to change was how they prepared orders to be manufactured, right? So traditionally, what they did was they would schedule the order, release it to manufacturing, then it would hit the first touch point. They would realize, oh, we don't actually have the packaging labels for this. Let's go get the packaging labels. All right, move it forward. Oh, we actually don't have the raw material for this order. You know what? Pause. Right. So you can imagine in a company that is processing, 20, 30 orders a day, just how quickly things would stack up. Right. So one process that we changed, full kit, right? Everything is prepared before it gets released to manufacturing. Do we have all of the labels? Do we have all the raw components? Right? If we don't, guess what? It's not being released.
Yeah.
Right? So that, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but that's kind of how you work through this whole entire process. We actually reduced headcount, right? And through natural attrition, because they had some kind of medical, there was a couple of team members that had some medical things that they were navigating that ultimately had them not returning back to work, right? So natural attrition. So we added zero headcount. Matter of fact, reduced it. We added zero technology overhead, right? Like didn't do any of that. And the short version of the kind of results, right, were we basically like 10x their output and eliminated their backlog. So that is right systems thinking. Okay.
I thank you for going through that because that really kind of laid it out for me. I appreciate that. I think one of the things you touched on there in that planning process, and this is something I run into as a marketer, and I think it's, boy, if you want to stump an organization, try and get them to define the problem, right? Try and get them, whether it's their problem with their internal customers or what is the problem your customer has. And I think if you can really define that, then all the solutions become easier to present. And it seems like to me, your planning stage is really about trying to hone in and define that problem. Do you think that's a real sticking point with people, is trying to define that problem, and how do you help them determine that?
Yeah. I think it's a real challenge for most people, and I see it kind of materialize in a couple of ways. Typically, right, folks that are owning and operating businesses haven't owned and operated lots of businesses, right? And if they have, generally speaking, they have been at similar revenue bands, right, or similar types of organizations. And so I think one of the kind of inherent challenges is that your lens of experience, right, is narrower, which really just means that defining the problem at the root cause level is next to impossible, right? Like because your lens of experience just it it's not big enough to be able to define it at a deep enough level that you're not just throwing things at it,
Wow.
right? Okay, so I think that's first and foremost, right? I've seen that in a variety of ways. I have a bunch of examples that all kind of fall into that same bucket. And it's, some people may hear that and say, like that's ridiculous, right? Like I know exactly what my problem is. And the pushback is how do you know that that's not a symptom and that's the actual root cause? Right?
Yeah.
Where else in your business, right? this business or another business? Have you seen a similar thing? And how did you get to the root cause and ultimately solve for it? And again, part of the value of somebody like myself, right? And I'm not just saying this is like a Dave thing, right? I used to do the same thing. I've told stories about how I used to only solve symptoms and I thought I was saving the world, right? Like it's just natural because my lens of experience was very limited. And as I grew, as I got into more businesses, as I saw more problems, I started to notice these patterns of, gosh, guys, we're not anywhere deep enough, right? Like we are talking about the wrong thing here. So that's like one angle, right? And like
Yeah.
I don't want to get in the weeds of like how you help because it's really just unpacking that. But I'll tell you like in a different, more like relevant example for today, right? Everybody is talking about AI. And so again, the conversation isn't like we should be AI. It's what problem do we think we can solve
Right.
with AI, right? And it's not just again about what specific problem, because I could rattle off 100 different ways that we could implement AI and solve problems. But how does that then connect, right, to the mission of what we're trying to do through the value that the customer measures us on? Because at the end of the day, right, if customers don't care about how fast you answer the phone or move from inquiry to estimate, right, if they don't, I'm being fictional because we know
Mm,
that they do, right,
right.
like why would we put resource towards solving that problem,
Right.
right? So that's where people I feel like get tripped up. They're not going deep enough. They're trying to do too many things at once, meaning they're trying to prioritize and solve for too many problems. And we have a real focus issue, right? So it's like really dive in, spend like just spend a week, right? I'm not saying spend 10 months. I'm saying spend a week, spend 3 meetings, right? Like
Yes.
spend
Yeah.
more than 5 minutes,
Yep.
thinking through all of the layers, all of the direct and indirect connections. And I would guarantee that you will get like further faster, right?
I love it. Okay. We got a couple minutes, and I'm not sure you can do this, but can you give us an example of what systemization looks like inside a high performing organization if you don't have that experience like you were just
Yeah.
mentioning?
Yeah, I think like these are some of my favorite opportunities because they're already far enough down the path to be thinking about some of these things, right? So typically in those types of organizations, they've got some sort of, continuous improvement culture that they are, kind of starting to get some foundational elements with, right? So for them, it's more of a focus issue. Typically what you'll find with those folks is an entire whiteboard of stuff to do. So the measuring stick for them and how to, kind of get further faster is like, again, I go back to what increases value, customer facing, and then start to look for kind of those, highest leverage activities to do like quick win things, right? Like, is there some opportunity to automate? I'm kind of thinking of this like, coining this term because I keep coming across it, but it's like this admin overhead, right? So like I've got a client right now that two kind of core processes that increase value tremendously for clients that we've automated are, both quote follow up, right? So like after we've provided the quote for specific customers, going through and instead of, again, some people hear that and think, oh, we're going to implement AI and we're going to, like have all these bots doing this follow up. No, we're automating the admin overhead. We're reducing that part, which means like Dave doesn't have to remember to go into the ERP and pull this specific report and to, do all the data analytics. We've built the background engine to do that. And then Dave gets a list of 4 tasks to do every day. And those 4 tasks are follow up on these 4 opportunities.
So
And
simple.
the goal isn't, hey, Greg, you ready to purchase some, XYZ from from me? It's, hey, Greg, just wanted to remind you we had this opportunity out there. Can I answer any questions for you? Can I provide any additional resources for you? Right. So it's things like that, thinking through that lens of, how can we reduce or eliminate some of that admin overhead? It's kind of the back to the idea of like you probably heard like the push versus pull, right? So what we're really doing is taking all that heavy lifting process, manual process, and looking for opportunities to streamline those things. Again, taking the real talent of the people and elevating their work, right? So that is where automation, AI, those are the activities that we should be focused on the companies that are already, far enough down the path where they can be thinking about this cool stuff.
Okay, so systemization in a high performing organization is probably has the problem well defined, has that planning process in place where they are very good at defining the problems, has also then established who are the people to be in touch with and to get their reactions and be able to measure that, and then have that process so well documented they know exactly where to augment and where to change it, and then finally have that technology in place to address the previous three items. Is that kind of a decent summary from a
Yeah.
half hour conversation here?
Yeah. No, you pretty much nailed it, because the opposite of that is most folks, are going backwards. So they're starting with the tool, they're saying, well, hey, I can automate this with, make.com or Zapier or Power Automate, or I can, implement a call out to OpenAI or, Anthropic or what have you, right? But they haven't gone the other way. So they don't, understand the problem at a deep enough level. They've not done, all of those first three steps that we've unpacked. So they start throwing, some random tools and or technology, and then it goes upstream because the people don't have confidence. It's not really helping them, meaning it's not eliminating or solving a pain point internally. It's not adding additional value externally. And so we continue to repeat the cycle. Oh, it's not Salesforce, it's HubSpot. Oh, it's
Yeah,
not ChatGPT, it's, Claude. Oh, Claude's terrible. We're using Gemini now, right? Like,
chasing our
it's
tail.
the wrong
Yeah,
conversation, right? It's
yeah,
because it's just the wrong way, right?
yeah.
So just flip it. That's all. That's not work with Dave. That's not do that. Just flip it. And I would almost guarantee you're going to get further faster because you're going to be solving the actual root causes of problems instead of just chasing your tail and solving for symptoms.
Fantastic. Dave, it's been a great half hour. I
Yeah,
really
man.
learned a lot from you and just helping me understand that the high systems in a high performing organization. That's a simple model to follow, probably not so simple to execute, which is why somebody needs to
Simple,
work.
not easy.
Yeah, simple but not easy. And when you're onto something like that, that's when you know you're headed down the right path. So if somebody wants to take on a simple but not easy task, how do they get in touch with Dave Chrysler and the Chrysler Club?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg. It's been a great conversation, and appreciate our friendship. But anybody can find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active there. You can check out the website. For anybody that's interested, we have a free operations diagnostic where you kind of go through a process and give you some starting points, some reference material for how to think about some of the things that you're perceiving in your organization. Again, no obligation, totally free. Takes about 24 hours, kind of start to finish, and so that's out there and available. And then obviously we publish all kinds of stuff. You already know that. So
Yeah.
I just love this stuff. I could talk about it, nonstop. So that's my whole thing.
No, I dig it too. All right, Dave. Thank you for joining us. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us on another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll see you next time.